Hey there, all you cool cats and kittens. Today we are talking about kegging beer. I'm very excited about this because this Mexican lager has been tasting fantastic. I've taken a couple samples. We know it's completely fermented out. And so now in here, essentially, I have uncarbonated but finished beer. So we're gonna show you a couple of techniques. The main one today is just a simple kegging. So I'm gonna go through that and then I'll get into some of the other tools as we go along that are optional. And I'll tell you what they do, why they're important. If you care about certain details, you're gonna get a lesson on that. So the main things that we have here are a cold beer inside the fermenter. It has been cold crashing with the glycol. You could also set your fermentation temperature or your fermentation chamber to cold crash. And so if you're using a keezer, a refrigerator, whatever it is, that gets all the particulates down to the bottom. The cold is gonna drive that down, making everything clear. So CO2, we are going to be doing an oxygen-free transfer today, which means exactly like professional breweries, no oxygen is going to come into contact with the beer, which is going to prevent oxidation. It helps shelf life and a multitude of factors that are important. And so, yeah, we're going to do that. Over here is a keg. This is clean. It is not sanitized. So I will show you how I sanitize my kegs. And let's get right to it. So, first step. Everything that we do cold side requires what? Sanitizing. So we have sanitizer in a spray bottle. This could be isopropyl alcohol. I use Star San. Here's a bucket with 5 gallons of water, 1 ounce of Star San. That is our sanitizer solution. And so I've got my hoses and lines in here. They're just waiting for us to be used in the sanitizer. So step 1 is to clean the inside of this keg. I'm sorry, sanitize the inside of this keg. It is clean. So I am going to take some sanitizer, put it inside the keg, dip the entire the entire keg lid into the sanitizer, mount it to the top. Also, my hands are clean. They've been cleaned before this. And we're gonna give it a shake. Now, all the surfaces on the inside of this keg have been exposed to that sanitizer. You could let it sit alternately, and this is actually what I usually do, is I will fill a keg like this with sanitizer, put a transfer line from the outpost to the inpost of a different keg, and then the blow off from these fermenters will end up pushing that sanitizer out. So I have a absolutely oxygen-free environment because the CO2 from fermentation has pushed that out of this keg. I didn't do that this time because I want to show you just what most people are doing. And so they're just gonna sanitize their keg like I am. Now we're gonna purge it. So that way we're gonna get as much oxygen out as possible. But yeah, that's the absolute preferred method is to purge it using the natural CO2 that is produced, but not everybody has the gear to do that. So we're going to open the lid back up, put this face up so it's not touching anything. I'm just gonna dump this right back into my sanitizer bucket. There we go. Made my first mess for the day. All right, she's good. That's what it looks like. There could be a bunch of foam in there. Don't fear the foam. Star San is perfectly safe and it's not gonna affect the flavor of your beer. The fine fellows over at Brewlosophy have proven time and time again that the foam isn't gonna change that beer flavor. So I dump it out as much as possible, but the last thing that you wanna do is reach in there with your hand and try and scoop it out because that just defeats the purpose of having sanitized something. I'm gonna put the lid back on. Now I'm gonna put CO2 into this keg and we're gonna purge it a couple of times. Theoretically, CO2 is heavier than oxygen. Gases mix very readily, and so I don't know if I'm a huge fan of that. So instead, we're just gonna purge it like 4 times. Go. The in-post. The gas in-post usually has either ridges there or it's got some kind of notch or a line indicating that it's the in-post, because these actually work differently. This is the out, so that is a liquid ball lock. Gas is usually light gray, liquid is black. I have this CO2, I'm gonna set it to 10 PSI. I can hear it running in. Once that goes, I know that I've gotten the full 10 PSI into this keg. We're just about there. This also gives me a chance to hear if there's any leaks from this keg. The pressure release valve might be stuck in the open position. The seal around the inside of the lid might be bad. Whatever the case, this gives me a chance to troubleshoot the keg in case there's something wrong. I have no issues with this one, so we're gonna let it rip. All I'm gonna do here is pull the pressure release valve. That's gonna force whatever air is in there out, and then CO2 is gonna be rushing right back in, and so we're gonna do this 4 times, like I said. Make sure that there's no oxygen in here, or as little oxygen as possible. Let it fill back up. You can hear it. Many home brewers, and I did for a long time, do not do this step. They don't have the ability or the gear to do an oxygen-free transfer. So what that means is I would essentially put the fermenter, which could be a bucket or whatever it is, up on a table, and then transfer from the spigot or the out, or using a auto siphon, and you would just run the hose directly into the clean and sanitized keg and let it run in, and you would do that as gently as possible. The only downside to that is that you're not oxygen free, and if any kind of stirring happens, any bacteria gets in there, it's just more chances for something to go wrong. The primary thing is oxidation, so that's why we're doing this step. I am gonna show you the other way, and it is fine, but you are opening yourself up to other risks. So I'm gonna purge this one more time, and we're gonna get to transferring. Okay, so this is filling up for the last time. I'm gonna go ahead and put this to the side. Once the CO2 stops running in, I'm going to disconnect it and connect this line to my fermenter. Turn that down just a little bit. There we go. Now I've pressurized this keg just a little bit. That's gonna put the pressure that we need for it to flow out rather quickly. So an explanation of what's going on inside the Flex Plus here. Behind this right here is a tube. So that tube is going down, and let's essentially we want that to be above the trube line. One of the only downsides of the Flex fermenters is that there's no trube dump port at the bottom. So that stuff is sitting at the bottom, and it's basically a cake of sludge. That's the yeast, that's if you dry hopped, that's the hops that are sitting down there. And so we want this racking arm to be pointed in a direction that's above that trube line. To help do that, there's a peg on this bar, and that shows me the direction that that tube is sitting. I have it at like a 45 right now. all you need to do is just loosen up this tri-clamp right here and turn that to the angle that you want. So I'm gonna turn it up just a little bit to make sure that we're above the trube line. Because this is a lager, I know that that trube is gonna be pretty small, like compared to, say, the IPA that we made, where it's gonna be thick with all that dry hop material is gonna be at the bottom. We're not gonna be that worried about this one, but we're also gonna check it before we transfer, and I'll show you how that works. So here we go. Everything needs to be sanitized again. I'm gonna dip my hands. There we go. And then I am going to take our transfer line here. There's our ball lock. I'm just gonna put that in. So here's our transfer line. We're dipping the tri-clamp in the sanitizer as well, so I'm just gonna lay this on here. Because I can't dip the whole fermenter, spray bottle. Make sure that's sanitized. And we connect them. Now, I'm going to open up this butterfly valve and I'm going to drain this line because this is full of oxygen. So if we're trying to stay as oxygen free as possible, I just have a simple old dump out valve. This is a old PBW, use whatever. We're going to open this up. This is going to allow us two things. One, we're going to see if there's any trube in the line. We're going to clear the butterfly valve itself, see if there's any trube that was stuck in there. And it's also going to push the oxygen out of the line itself. So I'm manually pushing this in. Again, my hands are sanitized. All of these components are sanitized. I'm just going to push this little valve in and clear the line. There were some boogers in there, and now they're not. Fix that. Take our keg. This is an important thing. So line balancing with CO2, say there's 10 PSI in the keg, 5 PSI in the fermenter. If I hook this up, that CO2 is gonna wanna shoot back. That won't oxidize or do anything bad to the beer, but what it can do is it can stir up the trube that's at the bottom. So I don't wanna do that. So I'm checking right here. I'm at like 2 PSI in the keg. I am gonna vent this and leave the pressure release valve in the open position so that gas can escape as I'm transferring in. Otherwise it pressurizes. Alternately, you can use a spunding valve or something on the gas side so that you can monitor exactly what that pressure is. This is important if you carbonate inside your fermenter, because if you've carbonated in here, now you have pressurized tank at 12.5 pounds. You want the keg to be at the exact same pressure. So with a pressure release valve, you can do that and set it just below that pressure so the gas is still coming out, but you're not foaming up the beer like crazy. So that's a topic in and of itself. Once you get there, it'll all make sense to you. Right now, I'm just gonna show you a basic oxygen-free transfer. So we want to hook up the beer line to the outpost. The outpost has a dip tube that goes all the way down to the bottom of this keg. So essentially we're transferring beer in through the way that it'll come out when we're serving. Sanitize this. You don't want all your hard work to go to waste because you didn't sanitize right. Vent this. It's gonna equalize the pressure. Hook it up. I can hear it transferring already. This is going to be good. I have pressure on here, so it's gonna force that beer over, and we'll know that it's done once it stops flowing, and we're gonna see CO2 coming through there. Again, I'm gonna prop this in the open position so that CO2 can be displaced by the liquid. While this is happening, I'm gonna show you a couple of things that I do or other tools that you can use while transferring. For a simple lager, there's not gonna be stuck transfer because of hops clogging up these ports or anything like that. But if you are transferring a beer like that, this is a very, very helpful tool. So this is an inline tea filter. It is directional, but essentially I can hook this up in line behind this setup, right? And so the beer is gonna flow in, it has to pass through this mesh screen, and that's gonna catch a lot of that hop particulate. And so those are particularly frustrating transfers to do, but I do make a lot of IPAs, and so this thing comes in extremely handy. You would just take it apart, dump the whole thing into the sanitizer bucket, and let that rip. Another thing that many folks like doing, mostly for Instagram because it makes for a pretty picture, is to put a sight glass in line with that transfer as well. So if you wanted to get really fancy with it and see what's going on with your transfer, you would put a sight glass, and all this is tri-clamps on the end. You can also put this directly in line with that port, but I don't like a lot of weight coming off of the front of these, so I very rarely do this, but I do see that in use. Lastly, during transfers, I label my keg. So this is a habit that I have. I have 6 taps, so keeping track of 6 random kegs would be veritably impossible. So I just take regular duct tape or white duct tape, write it on there with a Sharpie. So in this case, it is a Mexican lager. I log the date that it was brewed, the ABV, and the OG on it. Stick it to my pants, rip it off a couple of times. That way it doesn't leave residue on my keg. So, and I'm just gonna slap that boy right on there. And now our keg is done. One other thing while we are transferring, a simple way of keeping track of it, and this works especially good in the summer days when things are warm, is you can see the condensation line. So I can already tell we are up to here in the keg. So we're getting close. I expect it'll show up to about the 5-gallon mark because I know how much is in that fermenter. You can put a scale underneath this and you can watch the numbers as they are going up. You know that there's more beer transferring in. I don't usually do that because I know my volumes and it's just an unnecessary step, but a lot of folks do that, so know that that's an option. We're gonna wait until this transfer is finished, and then as soon as I see bubbles, I'm just gonna close this butterfly valve, disconnect everything, and then put this into the walk-in chiller, set it up with CO2, and we are going to burst carbonate it overnight. Here we go, she's done. There's bubbles. I'm gonna close that. I don't want any trube in there, so I'm not going to turn this port to be facing downward to find that trube line. If you wanted to maximize the output, you can do that. I prefer a crystal clear lager, so I'm just gonna leave it as it is. And I can tell on here, because you can feel through the walls of it, that it's, we've got plenty. So disconnect that, hang him up, and I'm just gonna spritz this to get the beer off of there. Close the pressure release valve. And the very last step is to take our CO2 again, put it on the end post, because this was open, just to make sure no oxygen is in there. Again, I might sound paranoid, but it really makes a big difference to be completely oxygen free. So I put the CO2 back on, we're at 10 PSI, I'm gonna vent it a couple times. That's gonna clear this headspace, make sure that it is all CO2. There you have it. We're gonna put this into the kegerator, walk-in chiller, keezer, whatever setup you've got, and I'm gonna burst carbonate it overnight. It'll be ready to drink tomorrow.